My husband of 12 years brought his mistress to our family Thanksgiving dinner and announced she would be moving into our home as his life partner. When I stood up to leave, he smugly declared that I could pack my bags because the house, the vacation properties, and everything we'd built together was legally his. What he didn't know was that my grandmother had never actually transferred the deeds to any of the properties into his name, and the document sitting in my purse would prove that everything he thought he owned still belonged to the Rosewood family trust. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. Before we dive into this incredible story of betrayal and justice, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to deal with a cheating spouse who thought they held all the cards. And definitely hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow I'm sharing a story about a woman who discovered her business partner was embezzling funds, but her revenge was so perfectly calculated it left him bankrupt and facing federal charges. My name is Isabella Rosewood Hartwell, and at 38, I thought I had built the perfect life in the charming coastal town of Willowbrook Bay, Oregon. The Rosewood name wasn't just familiar in our community, it was practically synonymous with the town's founding. My great-great-grandfather, Theodore Rosewood, had purchased over 2,000 acres of pristine coastline back in 1892, establishing what would become one of the most valuable private real estate holdings on the entire Pacific coast. Growing up as the last remaining Rosewood heir, I was raised with both privilege and profound responsibility. My grandmother, Margaret Rosewood, was a formidable woman who had managed the family properties with an iron fist and brilliant business acumen for over 60 years. She owned everything from the historic Rosewood Manor overlooking the bay to the commercial buildings that housed Willowbrook's most successful businesses, from luxury beachfront cottages that rented for premium rates to the marina where million-dollar yachts docked year-round. "Property is power, Isabella," Grandmother Margaret would tell me during our Saturday morning walks through the estate grounds. "But real power comes from understanding exactly what you own and never, ever letting anyone convince you to give it away carelessly." She taught me to read every deed, every contract, every legal document with the scrutiny of a lawyer and the instincts of a businesswoman. I met Marcus Hartwell during my final semester at Portland State University, where I was completing my degree in business management and real estate development. Marcus was pursuing his MBA with a focus on luxury hospitality management, and he was immediately fascinated when he learned about my family's extensive property holdings along the coast. "You have the perfect foundation for a boutique resort empire," he told me over coffee during our third date, his eyes lighting up as he described his vision of transforming some of our unused properties into exclusive vacation destinations. "With your land and my management expertise, we could build something truly extraordinary." I was charmed by his ambition and what seemed like genuine appreciation for preserving the natural beauty of our coastline while creating sustainable business opportunities. Marcus spoke passionately about environmental responsibility, community engagement, and creating jobs for local residents, values that aligned perfectly with everything my grandmother had taught me about being a responsible property owner. When we married in 2011, the ceremony was held in the gardens of Rosewood Manor, with the entire town of Willowbrook Bay celebrating alongside us. The local newspaper called it the wedding of the century, featuring a full-page spread about the union of the town's founding family with a promising young businessman who seemed destined to help carry the Rosewood legacy into the future. My grandmother, then 82 years old, had taken an immediate liking to Marcus. She was impressed by his respectful questions about property management, his interest in historical preservation, and his apparent understanding that marrying into the Rosewood family meant becoming a steward of something much larger than personal wealth. "He seems to grasp the responsibility that comes with our name," she told me privately after our engagement party. "But remember, darling, actions always speak louder than words. Time will reveal whether his intentions match his promises." In those early years, Marcus exceeded even my grandmother's cautious expectations. He threw himself into learning every aspect of our property management operations, from maintenance schedules to tenant relations to the complex web of zoning laws and environmental regulations that governed our coastal holdings. He spent weekends walking the properties with our longtime groundskeeper, learning about soil conditions and drainage systems. He attended town council meetings, building relationships with local officials and community leaders. When our daughter, Sophia, was born in 2013, Marcus seemed to embrace fatherhood with the same dedication he'd shown to our business interests. He insisted on converting one of the smaller cottages on our property into a private family residence, saying he wanted Sophia to grow up surrounded by the natural beauty that made our land so special. "I want her to understand her heritage," he would say, carrying 2-year-old Sophia on his shoulders as they explored tide pools along our private beach. "This land has been in your family for generations. It's her birthright, and someday she'll need to know how to protect it." For the first 5 years of our marriage, everything seemed perfect. Marcus managed our vacation rental properties with impressive efficiency, increasing our annual revenue by over 200%. He developed strong relationships with high-end travel agencies and luxury concierge services, ensuring our properties were booked solid throughout the peak seasons. The local community respected him as a businessman and appreciated his commitment to hiring locally and supporting environmental conservation efforts. But as I would discover, appearances can be devastatingly deceiving, and the man I thought I knew was preparing to claim everything my family had built over more than a century. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you. So if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. During my childhood at Rosewood Manor, I was immersed in a world where every corner held history and every decision carried the weight of generational responsibility. The sprawling Victorian estate, perched dramatically on clifftops overlooking the Pacific, wasn't just our family home. It was the crown jewel of a property empire that had been carefully cultivated for over 130 years. My grandmother, Margaret, was my most influential teacher, though her lessons extended far beyond traditional education. Every morning before school, she would take me through what she called property rounds, walking inspections of our various holdings throughout Willowbrook Bay. We'd start at the marina, where she'd point out which boat slips generated the highest revenue and why waterfront access was irreplaceable. Then we'd drive through town, stopping at our commercial buildings where she knew every tenant by name and could recite their lease terms from memory. "Real estate isn't just about collecting rent checks, Isabella," she would explain as we stood outside the historic Willowbrook Inn, a charming bed and breakfast that had been in our family since 1923. "It's about understanding what makes a community thrive and ensuring our properties contribute to that prosperity rather than extracting from it." My great-great-grandfather Theodore had been remarkably forward-thinking when he purchased the original land grant. Instead of selling parcels for quick profit as development pressure increased throughout the 20th century, each generation of Rosewoods had held firm to a long-term vision. They developed selectively, always maintaining the natural beauty that made our coastline so valuable, and they reinvested profits into acquiring additional strategic properties rather than pursuing lavish personal lifestyles. By the time I was born, the Rosewood Family Trust controlled an extraordinary portfolio. The 47-room Rosewood Manor and its surrounding 200 acres of gardens and private beach, 12 luxury vacation cottages scattered along prime beachfront locations, the Willowbrook Marina with 150 boat slips, 4 commercial buildings in the town center housing restaurants, galleries, and boutique shops, and nearly 500 acres of undeveloped coastline held in environmental conservation easements that generated substantial tax benefits while preserving the area's natural character. The financial education I received was unlike anything my prep school classmates experienced. While they learned about stocks and bonds in economics class, I was studying property tax assessments, zoning regulations, and environmental impact studies. Grandmother Margaret insisted I understand every aspect of real estate investment, from the glamorous side of hosting exclusive events at our properties to the unglamorous reality of septic system maintenance and storm damage repairs. Someday this will all be your responsibility, she would remind me during our weekly reviews of property income statements and maintenance reports. I won't live forever, and you need to be prepared to protect what 5 generations of Rosewoods have built. My parents, Richard and Elizabeth Rosewood, had tragically died in a sailing accident when I was 16, making my grandmother not just my mentor, but my guardian and closest family member. The loss strengthened our bond immeasurably, and she began preparing me even more intensively for eventual leadership of the family properties. College at Portland State was my first real experience living away from Willowbrook Bay, and I approached my business studies with the focused determination of someone who knew exactly what they'd be applying their education toward. I specialized in sustainable development and hospitality management, always with an eye toward enhancing our family's property value while maintaining our commitment to environmental stewardship. It was during my senior year that I met Marcus at a university networking event focused on Pacific Northwest tourism development. He was presenting a case study on boutique resort management, and his presentation was both sophisticated and environmentally conscious. After his talk, I approached him to discuss his ideas about balancing luxury accommodation with ecological preservation. Most developers see coastline as raw material to be maximized, Marcus said, as we continued our conversation over dinner that evening. But the most successful luxury properties are those that enhance and showcase the natural environment rather than competing with it. His philosophy seemed perfectly aligned with everything my family had practiced for generations. When I eventually brought him to Willowbrook Bay to meet my grandmother, he impressed her immediately with thoughtful questions about our conservation easements and our relationships with local environmental groups. He understands that we're stewards, not just owners, Grandmother Margaret observed after Marcus's first weekend visit. That's a rare perspective in someone his age. Our courtship unfolded against the backdrop of the spectacular Rosewood properties. Marcus would join me for sunrise walks along our private beaches, dinner parties in the Manor's formal dining room, and sailing expeditions in the Rosewood family yacht. He seemed genuinely enchanted by the history and responsibility that came with our family legacy. When Marcus proposed, he chose the Manor's rose garden at sunset, with the Pacific Ocean providing a dramatic backdrop. "I'm not just asking you to marry me," he said as he presented a vintage sapphire ring that had belonged to my great-grandmother. "I'm asking to become part of something extraordinary, to help you carry forward this incredible legacy your family has created." My grandmother was delighted by the engagement, particularly impressed that Marcus had sought her blessing before proposing. She began including him in property management discussions, teaching him the intricacies of our various revenue streams and the complex legal structures that protected our holdings. The wedding preparations became a showcase for the Rosewood properties themselves. We hosted the rehearsal dinner at the Marina Clubhouse, held the ceremony in the Manor Gardens, and accommodated out-of-town guests in our luxury cottages. Marcus took charge of coordinating many details, demonstrating an impressive understanding of hospitality management and an apparent appreciation for the historic significance of every location. Our honeymoon was spent touring other historic coastal properties throughout California and British Columbia, with Marcus taking detailed notes about successful preservation and development strategies. "I want to learn from the best examples," he explained, "so I can help make our properties even more successful while staying true to their character." In those early years of marriage, Marcus seemed to embrace every aspect of life as a Rosewood family member. He attended town council meetings, joined the Willowbrook Bay Chamber of Commerce, and volunteered with local environmental organizations. When Sophia was born, he insisted on traditional family naming conventions and wanted her christened in the Manor's private chapel, where 4 generations of Rosewoods had celebrated major life events. "This is where she belongs," Marcus would say, holding infant Sophia while standing on the manor's wraparound porch overlooking the bay. Someday she'll understand how lucky she is to grow up in a place like this, with this kind of family history surrounding her. Everything seemed perfect, exactly as I had dreamed my adult life would unfold. I had a devoted husband who shared my values, a beautiful daughter who would carry forward our family legacy, and properties that continued generating substantial income while remaining environmentally responsible and community-focused. What I didn't realize was that Marcus had been carefully studying not just our business operations, but our legal vulnerabilities, and that his apparent dedication to our family legacy was actually preparation for claiming it as his own. The changes in Marcus began subtly during our 3rd year of marriage, so gradually that I initially attributed them to the natural adjustments of settling into married life and new parenthood. What I now recognize as the beginning of systematic manipulation started with small suggestions about modernizing our approach to property management. Isabella, you're incredibly knowledgeable about the historical aspects of these properties, Marcus would say during our monthly financial reviews, but we need to think more strategically about maximizing their potential in today's market. He began pushing for higher rental rates on our vacation cottages, arguing that we were undercharging compared to similar properties in other coastal communities. When I expressed concern about pricing out the middle-class families who had been vacationing at our cottages for generations, Marcus would smile indulgently. Sentiment is admirable, but it doesn't pay for property maintenance or taxes. We have a responsibility to optimize our assets. He started scheduling important property decisions during times when he knew I'd be unavailable, during Sophia's nap times, or when I was attending my weekly volunteer work at the Willowbrook Bay Historical Society. When I'd return to find that he'd made unilateral decisions about contractor selections or lease negotiations, he'd dismiss my concerns with practiced patience. I handled it because time was a factor, he'd explain. Besides, these are operational details. You shouldn't have to worry about every minor decision. The first major red flag came when Marcus suggested we hire his college roommate, Derek Patterson, as our new property manager. Derek had recently moved to Oregon after what Marcus described as a successful career in Las Vegas real estate development. When I met Derek, something about his aggressive sales mentality and his obvious disdain for our conservation-focused approach made me deeply uncomfortable. "You're sitting on a gold mine here," Derek told me during his interview, gesturing toward our undeveloped coastline. "With the right development strategy, you could triple your revenue within 5 years. These environmental restrictions are just bureaucratic obstacles that can be navigated with proper legal representation." I rejected Derek's application immediately, but Marcus was visibly frustrated by my decision. "You're being short-sighted," he argued that evening. "Derek has connections throughout the West Coast development community. He could open doors we've never had access to." This marked the beginning of Marcus's campaign to portray me as overly emotional and resistant to progress. During conversations with our existing property manager, our accountant, and even my grandmother, Marcus would make subtle comments about my attachment to tradition, preventing us from reaching our full potential. When my grandmother's health began declining during Sophia's 2nd year, Marcus initially appeared supportive and concerned. He volunteered to take on more of her property management responsibilities, insisting that she needed to focus on her recovery rather than worrying about business details. "Let me handle the day-to-day operations," he urged during one of her hospital visits. "Isabella has enough stress managing Sophia's schedule and your care. I can coordinate with the tenants and contractors until you're feeling stronger." My grandmother, weakened by pneumonia and subsequent complications, reluctantly agreed to let Marcus assume temporary oversight of several properties. What I didn't realize was that this arrangement gave him access to confidential tenant files, lease agreements, and most crucially, detailed information about our property ownership structure and the various legal entities that held title to our land. During this period, Marcus began making improvements to our rental properties that I hadn't approved. He replaced the charming vintage furnishings in our beach cottages with generic modern pieces, arguing that contemporary decor would appeal to higher-end clientele. He removed handcrafted details and historic fixtures that had been part of the property's character for decades. These old-fashioned touches are limiting our market appeal, he explained when I discovered that he'd removed an original 1920s clawfoot bathtub from Cottage 7 and replaced it with a standard modern shower. Today's luxury travelers expect sophisticated amenities, not museum pieces. When longtime tenants in our commercial buildings expressed concerns about proposed rent increases that would force some small businesses to relocate, Marcus was dismissive of their complaints. Business is business, Isabella. If they can't afford market rates, they should make room for tenants who can. This attitude directly contradicted everything my family had believed about maintaining a thriving community. The Rosewoods had always balanced profitability with social responsibility, understanding that our success was interconnected with Willowbrook Bay's overall prosperity. My attempts to discuss these philosophical differences with Marcus led to increasingly heated arguments. He began suggesting that my emotional attachment to certain tenets and traditions was preventing us from building wealth for Sophia's future. "You're not thinking like a businesswoman," he'd say with barely concealed frustration. "You're thinking like a sentimental small-town girl who doesn't understand modern real estate markets." The criticism stung, particularly because it echoed insecurities I'd always harbored about whether I was truly qualified to manage such substantial holdings. Marcus seemed to sense these vulnerabilities and began exploiting them systematically. When I questioned his decision to hire an expensive marketing firm to rebrand our vacation rentals as exclusive luxury retreats, he sighed with exaggerated patience. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, Isabella. You're focused on preserving the past instead of building for the future." He started excluding me from important phone calls with contractors, accountants, and potential new tenants, claiming he was streamlining communications to avoid confusion. When I insisted on being included in these discussions, he'd schedule them during times when I was caring for Sophia or visiting my grandmother. The most troubling development was Marcus's growing relationship with a real estate attorney named Victoria Ashford, whom he'd hired without consulting me to review our property management practices and identify optimization opportunities. Victoria was an aggressive, sharp-dressed woman from Portland who specialized in what she called portfolio restructuring for high-value clients. "Marcus has shown me your holdings," Victoria told me during our first meeting. "And frankly, you're managing these properties like a charity rather than a business. There are numerous strategies we could implement to substantially increase your returns on investment." When I explained our family's commitment to community involvement and environmental stewardship, Victoria's expression was patronizing. "Noble ideals, but they're costing you millions in potential revenue. Marcus understands that wealth preservation requires making difficult decisions." Their frequent private meetings, often held at expensive restaurants in Portland rather than at our offices, made me increasingly suspicious. When I asked Marcus about the necessity of these elaborate business dinners, he accused me of jealousy and paranoia. "Victoria is helping us navigate complex legal and tax issues," he said dismissively. "If you're uncomfortable with professional relationships, maybe you should focus on the aspects of our business that suit your temperament better." The isolation was becoming systematic. Marcus had gradually positioned himself as the primary contact for all our major service providers and business relationships. When longtime family advisors tried to reach me directly, they were redirected to Marcus, who claimed to be handling all operational matters to reduce my stress. Most devastatingly, he began undermining my relationship with Sophia. After returning from business trips, which were becoming more frequent and longer, he would arrive with expensive gifts and elaborate plans for father-daughter adventures that excluded me. "Mommy needs her rest," he would tell 3-year-old Sophia when she asked why I couldn't join their outings to the beach or their visits to Portland's Children's Museum. Daddy will show you all the fun places. These manipulations were creating exactly the dynamic Marcus intended. I was becoming increasingly isolated from my own business affairs, my support network, and even my daughter, while he established himself as the competent, decisive leader of everything that had once been unquestionably mine. The foundation for his ultimate betrayal was being laid with methodical precision, and I was too trusting, too overwhelmed, and too gaslit to recognize the systematic dismantling of my authority and independence that was taking place under the guise of supportive partnership. The discovery that would change everything began, with something as mundane as a misfiled insurance document. It was a rainy Tuesday morning in November, 3 weeks before the Thanksgiving dinner that would become our final family gathering. I was in Marcus's home office looking for our homeowner's insurance policy to provide documentation for a minor claim when I accidentally knocked over a stack of files from his desk. As I gathered the scattered papers, one document caught my attention immediately. It was a preliminary title search report for Rosewood Manor, dated just 2 weeks earlier. My hands trembled as I read the details, because according to this report, someone had been researching the property's ownership history and legal description with what appeared to be preparation for a potential transfer. My heart pounding, I looked more carefully through the papers I'd scattered. Hidden beneath routine correspondence were several documents that made my blood run cold. There was a draft quitclaim deed form with my name pre-filled as the grantor and Marcus's name as the grantee for the manor and its surrounding 200 acres. Another document outlined a proposed marital property restructuring that would transfer ownership of all our major properties into Marcus's sole name for what it claimed were tax optimization purposes. Most shocking was a detailed property appraisal report I'd never seen before, showing current market values for our entire portfolio. The total was staggering, nearly $47 million in real estate assets. Handwritten notes in the margins in Marcus's unmistakable script included calculations about liquidation timelines and development potential maximization. But it was the email printouts at the bottom of the pile that revealed the full scope of his betrayal. Messages between Marcus and Victoria Ashford dating back over 18 months showed they'd been secretly developing a comprehensive plan to gain control of the Rosewood properties through a combination of legal manipulation and what Victoria called strategic relationship management. One email from Victoria, dated 6 months earlier, was particularly chilling. The wife's emotional attachment to family traditions is actually working in our favor. Her resistance to modernization makes her appear unreasonable to outside observers. Document every instance where she opposes profitable decisions. We're building a case for incompetent management that will support the restructuring proposal. Marcus's response revealed the calculated nature of his manipulation. Isabella's grandmother is the biggest obstacle. The old woman still has significant influence over property decisions. Once her health situation resolves itself, we'll have a clear path forward. Isabella trusts me completely and has no idea about the legal vulnerabilities in their current ownership structure. My hands shaking, I continued reading through their correspondence. They had been systematically researching every aspect of our property holdings, identifying opportunities to challenge existing trust arrangements, and exploring ways to consolidate ownership under Marcus's control. Victoria had even consulted with specialists in what she termed elder law complications and inheritance dispute strategies. The most devastating discovery was a recent email thread discussing their timeline for implementation. Marcus had written, "Thanksgiving dinner is perfect timing. Isabella's grandmother will be there, but her medications have been affecting her clarity lately. With the whole family present, we can make the announcement about restructuring seem like a natural evolution rather than a hostile takeover. By Christmas, everything should be transferred and secured." Victoria's response was coldly professional. "Remember, the key is presenting this as beneficial for Isabella and Sophia's financial security. Emphasize tax advantages and professional management. If she resists, We have documented evidence of her emotional decision-making and resistance to profitable opportunities. The relationship with the Brennan woman will help demonstrate your why. Commitment to making tough business decisions. The reference to the Brennan woman confused me momentarily until I found additional emails that made everything horrifyingly clear. Marcus had been conducting an affair with someone named Cassandra Brennan for over 8 months. She wasn't just his mistress. She was a real estate developer from California who specialized in acquiring and developing high-value coastal properties. Their email exchanges revealed a relationship that was both romantic and deeply strategic. Cassandra had been advising Marcus on property development opportunities and had even toured our holdings during one of my visits to my grandmother in the hospital. Together, they had developed detailed plans for developing our conservation lands, building luxury condominiums on our private beaches, and converting the manor into an exclusive resort. Once you have clear title to the properties, Cassandra had written in a recent email, we can move forward with the development timeline we discussed. The environmental restrictions can be challenged through legal channels, and with proper political connections, we can get variances that will unlock millions in development potential. Marcus's response showed he was fully committed to this betrayal. Isabella has no idea about real estate values or development opportunities. She's been raised to think of these properties as a sacred trust, rather than business assets. Once I have legal control, we can start the permitting process immediately. But the most shocking discovery was at the very bottom of the email stack. A message from Marcus to Cassandra describing his plan for Thanksgiving dinner. I'm bringing you to meet the family next week. It's time to stop hiding our partnership. Isabella needs to understand that her role in managing these properties is ending, and your expertise will be guiding our future decisions. Her grandmother is too weak to cause problems, and I've already prepared the legal documents for her signature. I sat frozen in Marcus's chair, staring at evidence of a betrayal so complete it took my breath away. He hadn't just been unfaithful, he had been systematically planning to steal everything my family had built over 5 generations. The man I had trusted with my heart, my daughter, and my family's legacy had been coldly calculating how to strip away everything that mattered to me. The timeline was terrifyingly close. Thanksgiving was just 3 weeks away, and according to his emails, Marcus planned to announce his restructuring proposal in front of our entire family, using the occasion to pressure me into compliance while presenting himself and Cassandra as the professional management team our properties needed. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. Running late tonight. Important client meeting in Portland. Don't wait up. I now knew that his client meetings were actually strategy sessions with Victoria and romantic dinners with Cassandra, all focused on perfecting their plan to destroy my life. As I carefully returned the documents to their original positions, my mind raced through the implications of what I'd discovered. Marcus had been using his insider knowledge of our family's legal vulnerabilities to construct an elaborate scheme for taking control of properties worth nearly $50 million. He had been documenting my every decision, building a case, to portray me as an incompetent manager who needed to be replaced by more sophisticated leadership. But in his arrogance and haste, Marcus had made a critical error. All of his planning was based on assumptions about our property ownership that weren't entirely accurate. The documents he'd been studying were current public records, but they didn't reflect certain private family arrangements that my grandmother had established years before Marcus entered our lives. As I sat in his office, surrounded by evidence of his betrayal, I realized that my grandmother's occasional cryptic comments about protecting what matters most had been more significant than I'd understood. Her insistence on maintaining certain legal structures just in case, and her reluctance to simplify our property holdings despite Marcus's recommendations, suddenly made perfect sense. That night, unable to sleep, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting Marcus immediately, I would gather more information and consult with people I trusted. If he wanted to play strategic games with my family's legacy, he was about to discover that being raised by Margaret Rosewood had taught me lessons he couldn't even imagine. The Thanksgiving dinner he was planning as his moment of triumph would indeed be a revelation, just not the kind he expected. The morning after discovering Marcus's betrayal, I drove to my grandmother's house with trembling hands and a mind racing with terrible possibilities. Margaret Rosewood lived in a charming craftsman cottage on the Rosewood estate grounds, a home she'd moved to after my grandfather's death, claiming the manor had become too grand for one old woman. But I suspected her real motivation had been to maintain independence while staying close enough to oversee the properties she'd spent her lifetime protecting. I found her in her sun-filled kitchen, sitting at her antique oak table with legal documents spread before her and her longtime attorney, Harold Westbrook, reviewing paperwork with the focused intensity I remembered from my childhood. At 89, my grandmother remained sharp as a tack, though she moved more slowly and tired more easily than she once had. "Isabella, darling," she said, looking up with immediate concern. "You look absolutely dreadful. What's happened?" Harold, who had been the Rosewood family attorney for over 30 years, immediately recognized the signs of crisis. "Should I give you ladies some privacy?" he asked, beginning to gather his documents. "No," I said quickly, sinking into the chair across from them. "Actually, I think I need both of you to hear this." With shaking hands, I pulled out photocopies of the documents I'd discovered in Marcus's office. "I found these yesterday. Marcus has been planning to steal our properties, and he's bringing his mistress to Thanksgiving dinner to announce some kind of takeover." My grandmother's expression didn't show surprise. Instead, she looked grimly satisfied, as if confirming suspicions she'd harbored for months. Harold immediately reached for his reading glasses and began examining the documents with professional scrutiny. "Well," my grandmother said after a long moment, "it appears my instincts about your husband were more accurate than I'd hoped they wouldn't be." She turned to Harold. "Show her the documents we've been preparing." Harold nodded and pulled a thick manila folder from his briefcase. "Isabella, your grandmother contacted me 6 months ago with concerns about Marcus's behavior and some irregularities she'd noticed in property management decisions. We've been quietly reviewing and reinforcing the legal structures protecting your family's assets." "You knew?" I whispered, looking at my grandmother with a mixture of relief and confusion. "I suspected," she corrected gently. Marcus had been asking too many detailed questions about property ownership, requesting access to documents that weren't relevant to his management responsibilities, and pushing for changes that would have simplified our legal structure in ways that concern me. She reached across the table and took my hand. "Remember, darling, I've been protecting these properties for over 60 years. I've seen every kind of threat imaginable: economic downturns, development pressures, family disputes, and yes, even charming fortune hunters who marry into families for strategic purposes." Harold spread several documents across the table. "What Marcus doesn't know," he explained, "is that the property titles he's been researching don't tell the complete story. Your great-great-grandfather Theodore was remarkably prescient when he established the original trust structures." The first document Harold showed me was a copy of the original Rosewood Family Trust, established in 1924. This trust has been modified several times over the decades, but its core protections have remained constant. The most important provision is that no property can be transferred out of the trust without unanimous consent from all surviving beneficiaries and approval from 3 independent trustees. "Marcus isn't a beneficiary," my grandmother added with satisfaction. "Spouses can be granted management authority and income rights, but they cannot gain ownership or transfer rights without specific amendments to the trust documents." Harold pulled out another document. "Furthermore, 6 months ago, your grandmother executed additional protective measures. She established what's called a successor trustee provision that automatically activates if any attempt is made to transfer trust properties without proper authorization." I stared at the legal papers, trying to process their implications. So Marcus can't actually take the properties, even if I sign whatever documents he's prepared? Absolutely not, Harold confirmed. Any signatures obtained through fraud, duress, or misrepresentation would be legally void. But more importantly, the properties he believes are held in your individual name are actually held by irrevocable trust structures that he has no legal standing to challenge. My grandmother leaned forward with the expression she'd worn when teaching me business lessons as a child. Isabella, your great-great-grandfather lived through the economic panic of 1893. He learned that wealthy families who don't protect their assets properly can lose everything to clever manipulators and unexpected crises. Every generation of Rosewoods has maintained legal safeguards that Marcus apparently never bothered to fully investigate. Harold produced a thick stack of additional documents. We've also been documenting Marcus's unauthorized activities. The property appraisals he commissioned, his meetings with Victoria Ashford, even his communications with potential developers. All of these activities violate the fiduciary responsibilities outlined in his management agreement. You've been watching him? I asked, amazed by the thoroughness of their preparation. Professional monitoring, Harold clarified diplomatically. When your grandmother expressed concerns, we hired a private investigator to document any irregular activities. We now have comprehensive evidence of Marcus's breach of fiduciary duty, his attempts to fraudulently transfer property, and his conspiracy with outside parties to undermine family trust interests. My grandmother's eyes sparkled with the strategic intelligence that had made her a formidable business leader for decades. We also discovered something quite interesting about his mistress, Cassandra Brennan. She's been investigated by the California Real Estate Commission for fraudulent acquisition practices and has been involved in at least 3 lawsuits alleging elder exploitation. So Marcus has unknowingly partnered with someone who specializes in exactly the kind of scheme they're attempting, Harold added. This actually strengthens our position considerably, as it demonstrates a pattern of predatory behavior rather than isolated poor judgment. I felt overwhelmed by the complexity of legal protections I'd never known existed. What happens at Thanksgiving dinner? He's planning to make some kind of announcement, probably pressuring me to sign documents in front of the entire family. My grandmother smiled with quiet confidence. Let him make his announcement. Let him present his grand plan and introduce his development expert. Let him explain how much more profitable our properties could be under his sophisticated management. But won't that humiliate our family in front of everyone? I protested. Isabella, my grandmother said firmly, sometimes you have to let people reveal themselves completely before you expose their deceptions. Marcus has been calculating this betrayal for months. He deserves to experience the full consequences of his choices. Harold opened his briefcase and withdrew a final set of documents. We'll be prepared with comprehensive legal documentation, proving that Marcus has no authority to transfer any properties, that his management agreement is void due to breach of fiduciary duty, and that any documents he presents are fraudulent. More importantly, my grandmother added, we have evidence of his conspiracy with known real estate fraud specialists, which elevates this from civil breach of contract to potential criminal fraud. As I absorbed the full scope of their preparation, I felt a mixture of relief and nervous anticipation. So we let him proceed with his plan, knowing it will fail? We let him hang himself with his own rope, my grandmother confirmed. Marcus has underestimated the legal sophistication of our family's asset protection strategies. His arrogance will be his downfall. Harold gathered the documents back into organized stacks. Isabella, you need to understand that what your husband has attempted goes beyond marital betrayal. He's tried to commit what amounts to grand theft against a family trust worth nearly $50 million. The legal consequences will be severe. My grandmother reached for my hands again. I know this is painful, darling, but remember what I've always taught you. The Rosewood family has survived and thrived for over a century because we prepare for threats and protect what matters most. Marcus chose to see our family as an opportunity for exploitation rather than a responsibility for stewardship. As I drove home that afternoon, I carried with me not just legal documents that would protect our family's legacy, but also a renewed understanding of the wisdom and strength that had been passed down through generations of Rosewood women. Marcus might have thought he was outsmarting a sentimental small-town family, but he was about to discover the difference between inherited wealth and inherited wisdom. Thanksgiving dinner would indeed be a revelation, but not the triumph Marcus was expecting. Thanksgiving morning arrived with the crisp, clear weather that made Willowbrook Bay's coastline look like a postcard. The manor's staff had spent days preparing for what I now knew would be our family's most dramatic gathering in generations. The formal dining room gleamed with polished silver and crystal, the mahogany table extended to accommodate 24 guests, and arrangements of autumn flowers from our own gardens created an atmosphere of elegant celebration. I had spent the previous week in a strange state of suspended animation, watching Marcus make his final preparations while knowing exactly what he was planning. He'd been unusually attentive, bringing me coffee in bed and complimenting my appearance with what I now recognized as the calculated charm of someone preparing to deliver devastating news. His phone calls with Victoria Ashford had become more frequent and secretive, and I'd noticed him reviewing documents in his office late into the night. "You seem nervous about today," I mentioned casually as we dressed for dinner, watching him adjust his tie for the third time. "Just want everything to be perfect," he replied, avoiding eye contact. "This is an important day for our family's future." The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. It would indeed be important for our family's future, just not in the way he imagined. Guests began arriving at 4 o'clock. Our longtime family friends, neighbors from Willowbrook Bay, my grandmother's bridge club members, and several business associates who had worked with our properties for decades. These were people who had known the Rosewood family for generations, who understood our values and had watched me grow up among these historic properties. Marcus greeted everyone with his most charming persona, playing the role of devoted family man and successful property manager. He made sure to mention his innovative management strategies and exciting development opportunities to several guests, setting the stage for his planned announcement. At exactly 5:30, a sleek black Mercedes pulled into our circular driveway. Through the window, I watched Marcus's face light up as Cassandra Brennan stepped out of the driver's seat. She was even more striking in person than in the photos I'd discovered. Tall, blonde, impeccably dressed in a designer cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Everything about her screamed expensive sophistication and calculated ambition. Marcus rushed outside to greet her, and I watched through the window as they embraced with the familiarity of intimate partners before quickly composing themselves into professional demeanor. When they entered the manor together, Marcus's hand possessively on her lower back, a hush fell over the assembled guests. "Everyone," Marcus announced with practiced confidence, "I'd like you to meet Cassandra Brennan, a renowned real estate development consultant from California. Cassandra has been advising us on exciting opportunities to maximize the potential of our family properties." Cassandra smiled with polished charm as Marcus introduced her around the room. She had clearly been coached on key family members and property details, smoothly discussing conservation challenges and development opportunities with impressive knowledge of our holdings. My grandmother, seated regally in her favorite armchair, near the fireplace, watched these introductions with the sharp attention of a hawk observing potential prey. Harold Westbrook stood nearby, sipping his wine and maintaining the casual demeanor of a family friend, rather than revealing his role as our legal strategist. During cocktails, I noticed Marcus and Cassandra exchanging meaningful glances and subtle touches that confirmed their romantic relationship to anyone paying attention. Several longtime family friends looked confused and uncomfortable, clearly sensing undercurrents they didn't understand. When we moved to the dining room for dinner, Marcus had strategically seated Cassandra beside him at what was traditionally my grandmother's place of honor at the head of the table. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. He was positioning her as the new matriarch of our family gathering. Throughout the meal, Marcus steered conversation toward property values, development trends, and what he called modernization opportunities. Cassandra contributed expert commentary about luxury resort development and the potential for transforming historic properties into profitable entertainment destinations. The Rosewood holdings represent extraordinary untapped potential, Cassandra explained to the captivated audience. With proper development strategies, these properties could become the crown jewel of Pacific Coast luxury hospitality. I watched. My grandmother's expression remained neutral, though I knew her well enough to recognize the steel behind her polite smile. Harold continued playing his role as casual family friend, asking innocuous questions that seemed friendly but were actually gathering evidence of their conspiracy. After dessert was served, Marcus stood and tapped his wine glass for attention. The room fell silent as he began what he clearly considered his moment of triumph. Family and friends, he began with the confidence of someone who believed he held all the cards. I have some exciting news to share about the future of the Rosewood properties and our family's legacy. He pulled a leather portfolio from the sideboard behind him. After months of careful analysis and legal consultation, I've prepared a comprehensive restructuring plan that will optimize our property management and unlock tremendous value for future generations. Marcus opened the portfolio and began distributing copies of documents to family members around the table. As you can see, this plan consolidates ownership under more efficient management structures and creates partnerships with experienced development professionals who can guide us toward maximum profitability. I glanced at the documents he'd prepared. They were exactly what I'd expected based on his emails with Victoria. Quitclaim deeds transferring major properties into his name, partnership agreements with Cassandra's development company, and authorizations for environmental variance applications that would allow construction on our conservation lands. Isabella has been wonderful as a caretaker of our family traditions, Marcus continued, his tone patronizing. But maintaining these properties as museum pieces isn't sustainable in today's economy. Cassandra brings the expertise we need to transform the Rosewood holdings into a profitable enterprise that can support our family for generations. Murmurs of confusion and concern rippled around the table. Several guests looked between Marcus and me, clearly wondering why I wasn't participating in this supposed family announcement. The legal documents are straightforward, Marcus explained, pulling out an expensive pen. Isabella just needs to sign the transfer authorizations, and we can begin implementing these exciting improvements immediately. He placed the pen beside my plate with supreme confidence. Darling, I know change can be difficult, but this is what's best for our family's future. The room held its collective breath as everyone waited for my response. Marcus stood behind my chair, his hand on my shoulder in a gesture that appeared supportive but felt controlling. Cassandra watched with barely concealed anticipation, probably calculating her share of the millions she thought they were about to acquire. I looked around the table at faces I'd known my entire life, family friends who had supported the Rosewood, legacy for decades, business associates who had worked honestly with our properties, community members who understood what our family represented in Willowbrook Bay's history. Then I looked at my grandmother, who gave me the slightest nod of encouragement. Actually, Marcus, I said quietly, standing up from my chair, I think there are some things about our property ownership that you don't fully understand. His confident expression flickered momentarily. What do you mean? I mean, I continued, reaching into my own purse for documents Harold had prepared, that you've based this entire plan on assumptions about our legal structure that aren't accurate. I placed the first document on the table, a copy of the original Rosewood Family Trust with its irrevocable property protections highlighted in yellow. Our properties aren't held in individual ownership, Marcus. They're held in trust structures that you have no legal authority to modify. Marcus's face went pale as he grabbed the document and began reading. Around the table, guests watched with growing fascination as the evening took an unexpected turn. Furthermore, I continued, placing additional documents on the table, we have comprehensive evidence of your unauthorized property research, your conspiracy with known fraud specialists, and your breach of fiduciary responsibility as our property manager. Cassandra's polished composure cracked as she realized their carefully constructed plan was collapsing. This is obviously an emotional overreaction, she interjected. Marcus is trying to help this family maximize valuable assets instead of clinging to outdated. Ms. Brennan, my grandmother interrupted, her voice carrying decades of authority. I suggest you stop talking before you incriminate yourself further. Harold Westbrook stepped forward, his casual demeanor replaced by professional seriousness. Marcus, you should know that we've documented your activities over the past 6 months. The property appraisals, the meetings with Victoria Ashford, the unauthorized development consultations, all of these violate your management agreement and constitute attempted fraud against the family trust. The silence in the room was deafening as Marcus stared at the evidence of his failed scheme scattered across our Thanksgiving table. The silence that followed Harold's declaration seemed to stretch endlessly, broken only by the soft crackling of logs in the dining room fireplace. Marcus stood frozen behind my chair, his hand still resting on my shoulder, but I could feel his grip trembling as the full magnitude of his exposure settled over him. Cassandra was the first to recover, her professional instincts kicking in as she attempted damage control. I think there's been a serious misunderstanding, she said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. My consultation with Marcus has been entirely legitimate business planning. If there are family trust complications, we can certainly adjust our recommendations. Ms. Brennan, Harold interrupted firmly, producing another document from his briefcase. We have recorded phone conversations between you and Marcus discussing methods for circumventing environmental protections and exploiting what you called legal vulnerabilities in elderly property owners. Would you like me to play excerpts for our guests? The color drained from Cassandra's face as she realized the scope of evidence against them. Around the table, our family, friends, and neighbors watched with a mixture of shock and fascination as the evening's revelations unfolded. My grandmother rose slowly from her chair, commanding attention through sheer presence despite her advanced age. Marcus, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent nearly 9 decades protecting what mattered most. Did you honestly believe that a family who has preserved these properties for over 130 years wouldn't have safeguards against exactly this kind of betrayal? Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out strangled and desperate. Margaret, you don't understand the financial pressures we're facing. Property taxes, maintenance costs, environmental compliance. We need to modernize our approach to remain viable. What we need, my grandmother replied coldly, is to remove individuals who view our family legacy as raw material for personal enrichment. I stood and walked to the sideboard where Marcus had placed his portfolio of fraudulent documents. With deliberate calm, I gathered them all and handed them back to him. These documents are worthless, Marcus. But more than that, they represent a fundamental misunderstanding of who you were dealing with. Marcus's face cycled through emotions: disbelief, anger, desperation, and finally a cold fury that revealed his true character more clearly than anything else could have. You can't do this to me, Isabella. I've spent 8 years building value in these properties. I have rights. You have the right to pack your belongings and leave our home, I interrupted. Tonight, the finality in my voice seemed to shatter, whatever remaining composure Marcus had maintained. This is insane. I'm your husband. I'm Sophia's father. You can't just throw away our family because of some property disputes. You threw away our family the moment you decided to steal from us, I replied. What we're throwing away tonight is the illusion that you ever cared about anything other than our assets. Harold stepped forward with a restraining order document. Marcus, You're legally prohibited from accessing any Rosewood Properties bank accounts or business records as of this moment. Security personnel are already changing access codes and locks throughout the estate. As if summoned by his words, 2 security guards appeared in the dining room doorway. Our longtime head of security, Robert Torres, approached respectfully. Mrs. Hartwell, we're ready to escort Mr. Hartwell and his guest to collect personal belongings under supervision. The reality of his complete defeat finally penetrated Marcus's shock. His shoulders sagged as he looked around the table at faces that had once regarded him with respect and affection, now showing everything from disappointment to disgust. Cassandra, he said weakly, turning to his partner in the failed scheme, we need to call Victoria. There has to be some legal recourse. There isn't, Cassandra replied flatly. Her earlier charm completely evaporated. I'm not going down with your amateur hour operation, Marcus. Find your own lawyer. She was already moving toward the door, abandoning him with the same calculated efficiency she'd probably used to abandon previous failed schemes. My grandmother watched Cassandra's hasty exit with grim satisfaction. 60 years of business experience teaches you to recognize people who will turn on their partners the moment things go wrong, she observed. I'm only surprised it took this long for her true character to emerge. As Marcus was escorted upstairs to pack his belongings, our dinner guests began processing what they'd witnessed. Several longtime family friends approached to offer support and express their shock at Marcus's betrayal. Isabella, we had no idea, said Mrs. Chen, who had been my piano teacher as a child and remained close to our family. Marcus always seemed so dedicated to preserving your family's legacy. That's exactly what made him dangerous, my grandmother replied. The most effective manipulators are those who understand how to mirror the values of their targets. Harold began collecting the evidence documents scattered across our dining table. The district attorney will want to review everything we've gathered. Between the attempted fraud, the conspiracy with known real estate scam artists, and the breach of fiduciary duty, Marcus could face significant criminal charges. I felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and unexpected empowerment. What happens to Sophia through all this? She's only 5 years old, and Marcus is still her father. Supervised visitation, most likely, Harold explained gently. Given the evidence of his character and the potential criminal charges, family court will prioritize Sophia's stability and safety. An hour later, Marcus emerged from upstairs carrying 2 suitcases, escorted by security. He paused in the dining room doorway, looking back at the life he'd tried to steal and destroy. This isn't over, Isabella, he said, his voice hollow, but still carrying hints of the arrogance that had led to his downfall. I'll fight this in court. I'll prove that you're an unfit mother, that you're emotionally unstable. Marcus, I interrupted quietly, the only thing you've proven tonight is that my grandmother was right about you from the beginning. After he left, the remaining dinner guests gradually departed, many stopping to express their support and amazement at how we'd handled the crisis. As the manor grew quiet, I found myself alone with my grandmother in the library where she'd taught me so many lessons about business and life. Are you all right, darling? She asked, settling into her favorite leather chair beside the fireplace. I think so, I replied honestly. It's strange. I feel like I should be more devastated. My marriage is over. My daughter's father is facing criminal charges, and everything I thought I knew about the past 8 years was a lie. My grandmother nodded thoughtfully. But you also discovered that you're stronger than you knew, that your family's protections held firm, and that the values we've raised you with proved more powerful than his manipulations. She was right. Despite the betrayal and upheaval, I felt oddly liberated. For months, I'd been doubting my judgment, questioning my business decisions, and accepting Marcus's criticism of my approach to property management. Now I understood that his undermining had been deliberate preparation for theft, not legitimate concern for our family's welfare. What happens now? I asked. Now? my grandmother said with the wisdom of someone who had weathered many storms. You become the leader. You were always meant to be. You raised Sophia with the values that have sustained our family for generations, and you protect what matters most, not just the properties, but the principles they represent. 6 months later, Marcus pled guilty to attempted fraud and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Cassandra Brennan was charged in California for similar schemes against other families and received a longer sentence. Victoria Ashford lost her legal license for conspiring in fraudulent property transfers. I took over full management of the Rosewood properties with my grandmother's guidance, implementing sustainable development practices that honored our conservation commitments while creating new revenue streams. We established a foundation supporting environmental education and historic preservation, ensuring that future generations would understand the responsibility that comes with inherited stewardship. Sophia adjusted remarkably well to our new reality, seeming to thrive in an environment free from the tension and manipulation that had characterized her father's final years with us. She spent afternoons with her great-grandmother, learning the same lessons about property, responsibility, and values that had protected our family for over a century. The most satisfying development came when several families who had been targeted by similar real estate fraud schemes contacted us for advice. We were able to help them protect their properties and bring additional criminals to justice, turning our painful experience into a resource for preventing others' victimization. Marcus had brought his mistress to our family dinner believing he was announcing his victory. Instead, he revealed his true character and triggered the very protections that ensured his complete defeat. Sometimes justice comes not from revenge, but from the simple power of truth and the wisdom of those who came before us. The Rosewood legacy remained secure, stronger than ever, and ready to be passed to the next generation with the same values and protections that had sustained us through more than 130 years of challenges and opportunities. Coming up next, you'll discover 2 more incredible stories of family betrayal and the unexpected ways justice can emerge from the most devastating circumstances. If this story of property, family, and the power of preparation resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe and share your own experiences in the comments below. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.